The night before Christmas, the house was quiet except for the hum of the oven. A plate of gingerbread sat untouched on the counter, their sugared edges glinting under the kitchen light. I stood with the phone pressed to my ear, listening as my brother Evan said with the same certainty he always carried, "You'll watch them. We're flying out early." My answer came softer than I expected, but firm. "No," I said. Just that single word, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the snow gathering outside. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, heart unsteady, wondering how many years I had been written into his schedule without ever agreeing to it. The next morning, a sharp knock broke the quiet. I opened the door to see Evan with his leather planner already spread open, neat boxes inked in blue. Maya stood beside him, bags stacked at her feet, and the children clutching stuffed animals with sleepy eyes. Cold air swirled past them into my hall, carrying the smell of salt from the sidewalk. Evan tapped the page where my name was penciled in like an obligation. For the first time, I didn't step aside. I wondered how long had I let this define me. Years of quiet compliance stretched behind me like a road I had walked half asleep. Every holiday, every long weekend, every time Evan needed a break, my phone would ring and I would say yes before even taking a breath. I remembered summer afternoons when my apartment turned into a playroom, toys scattered across the floor, while I postponed my own plans. I remembered autumn evenings hurrying from work to pick up the children because he had a meeting that ran long. I remembered how often my calendar had been erased so his could remain neat. At first, it had felt like love, like being part of something bigger, a family that leaned on each other. But over the years, the leaning had become weight-pressing until I could no longer tell where care ended and duty began. In the quiet of my own kitchen, I had started to see the cracks. My life had grown small not because I wanted it that way, but because I had given away its edges piece by piece. My apartment held reminders of myself that I rarely touched: an unopened travel brochure pinned under a magnet on the fridge, a dusty violin case by the window, a half-finished knitting project folded in a basket. They waited for me as if patient enough to believe I would return. That Christmas morning, I noticed them with a new kind of clarity. The apartment smelled faintly of apple soap from the dishes I had washed the night before, the counters clean, the floors swept. Outside the window, snow slid from the branches of the sycamore tree, tapping gently against the glass as it fell. On the fridge door, a small sheet of paper with my goals for the coming year clung under a red magnet shaped like a cardinal: join a choir, visit the coast, take a class just for fun. I had written those words late one night in November, when the loneliness pressed harder than usual. I had promised myself then that the new year would look different. Evan had once laughed when he saw that list, dismissing it with a shrug. "You don't have time for that, Nora. You're too needed here." I had swallowed his words, but they stayed lodged in me like a stone. Now, standing by the door with him and Maya and the children waiting expectantly, I felt the stone shift. I thought of the gingerbread on the counter, untouched, waiting for hands that never came. I thought of my mother's photograph on the shelf, her smile turned toward me in a frame I had kept face down too long. Would she have told me to stop? Would she have reminded me that saying no did not mean I loved them less? Evan set his planner down on the entry table as if it were a document of law, the blue ink sharp against the cream pages. His finger tapped the box where my name was written, neat and certain, as though my life were a square he could fill. "It's already arranged," he said. Maya gave me a quick smile that did not reach her eyes, her coat still dusted with snow. "We know it's last minute," she added, "but the kids were so excited to see you." Behind them, Sam shifted from foot to foot, and little Ellie rubbed her eyes with the corner of her scarf. I bent down and brushed a curl from Ellie's forehead, my chest aching. I loved them, but love could not erase the fact that my brother's expectations were carved too deep. "I can't," I said quietly, letting the words rest in the air. Evan frowned as though he hadn't heard. "Of course you can. We'll be back by New Year's. You'll manage." He glanced at the children, then back at me, already moving past my refusal. The old pattern, the one where my voice disappeared beneath his certainty, hovered between us. For a moment, I almost let it swallow me again. But something in me held firm. I stepped aside and gestured them in from the cold, not because I agreed, but because the wind was sharp and I couldn't leave the children shivering on the porch. Their boots squeaked on the hardwood, leaving small wet marks that spread into dark patches. Maya set the bags down with relief, already unwrapping her scarf. Evan began flipping through pages, muttering about flights and check-in times. I folded the dish towel in my hands with slow precision, laying it across the counter, smoothing its corners flat. The silence that followed my refusal seemed to irritate Evan more than any argument could. He looked up Planner, open his jaw set. "You've always helped," he said, a note of disbelief under his words, as if history alone guaranteed my consent. I thought of every night I had given up to keep his household running, every weekend, rearranged, every plan abandoned. How many times had I whispered to myself, "Next time I'll say no"? How many times had I stayed quiet because it felt easier than explaining why my own time mattered? I glanced toward the shelf where the snow globe sat still and unshaken. I reached for it absent-mindedly, tilting it until white flakes swirled inside tiny fragments, drifting until they settled again. I let the globe rest in my palm and asked myself, not for the first time, when did my care become his entitlement? The weight of old memories pressed against me as Evan sat at my table, flipping through his planner as if nothing I said mattered. I watched his pen hover, ready to adjust flights and dinner reservations, ready to redraw my life into his neat boxes. Maya smoothed her gloves across her lap, pretending calm, though I saw the flicker of impatience in her eyes. Their confidence came from years of habit, years when I never raised a hand or voice to stop them. My mind wandered back to those moments, summer evenings when I canceled lessons to drive across town, autumn weekends where I skipped gatherings with friends because Evan had a big pitch on Monday. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that next time I would draw a line. But next time always looked the same. Sam pulled a toy car from his pocket, rolling it across the coffee table with a hum. Ellie sat on the rug, tracing shapes in the fogged glass of the window. Their innocence cut through my resolve. Yet it also reminded me of how I had been enlisted in their routine without choice. Love did not mean surrendering every hour of my own life. Evan leaned back in his chair. "You know we can't reschedule. Everything's booked," he said, his tone heavier now. "You'll be fine. You always are." His certainty was a blade, sharp and careless. I lit the candle on the table, its pine scent curling into the room, steadying me more than his words could. The small flame was quiet but sure, and I clung to it as a reminder that boundaries could glow softly without burning everything down. I thought of the nights when I longed to join the community choir but stayed home because the children were asleep in my bed. I remembered the trip to the coast I had once planned only to cancel when Maya asked for a week of detox time. Each sacrifice had been swallowed without acknowledgement, a hidden invoice left unpaid. I glanced again at Evan's planner, at the blue-inked squares that claimed me. To him, my life looked tidy inside those lines, but to me, it was a narrowing corridor, walls pressing close. The snow globe rested on the shelf where I had left it, still swirling from the shake I gave it minutes earlier. Watching the flakes sink, I asked myself, how much longer could I let my own silence write the story? The question throbbed in my chest, louder than his pen scratching the page. I reached for the planner before Evan could flip another page and slid it toward me, the leather warm from his hands. The neat grid of blue ink looked like a fence around my hours. My name appeared again and again, penciled with the kind of confidence that came from never being challenged. I took a pen from the drawer, black instead of blue, and drew a single line through every box that carried me as a footnote. My hand did not shake. I wrote in those spaces with slow care, choir at 7, walk in the snow at 9, pack for the morning train. I circled the words and underlined the date. Christmas Day, my Christmas Day. Evan stared as if I had crossed out a law. The room smelled of pine from the candle and apple from the soap on the counter. I could hear the furnace hum, the low, steady promise that warmth would keep moving through the vents while I rebuilt the shape of my day. Maya made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Nora," she said, soft as frosting, "the kids were hoping for cookies and movies." She gestured to the gingerbread on the plate, an easy bribe. I slid the plate closer to the children and said they could take some for the road. Ellie's eyes brightened. Sam reached, then paused and looked at his father, unsure. Evan set his jaw cheeks, already flushed from the cold outside and from the heat inside his own certainty. "You can't be serious," he said. "We have a flight." I nodded toward the bags by the door. "Then you should leave for the airport." My voice surprised me with how even it sounded. Inside, something small clicked into place the way a drawer closes when it has been hanging open for too long. The sound did not belong to wood and metal. It belonged to me. Evan pushed back his chair. It scraped the floor and left a thin mark that a little oil would lift later. I found myself noticing such details, the practical scale of things I could actually change, the wood grain catching the light, the candle flame gathering itself, then calming the tiny drift inside the snow globe, where flakes tumbled and settled in their own time. I turned the planner gently and passed it back. "These are my plans," I said. "They are not a threat. They are my life." He blinked as if the word life did not belong to me in the same way it belonged to his calendar. His eyes moved to the suitcase sitting by the hallway bench. It was not large, only enough for a sweater, a book of carols, a second pair of gloves, and the train tickets I had printed last night and tucked into the inside pocket. I had made those plans without announcing them to anyone, a quiet act, the kind that does not ask permission. The knowledge that I could do a simple thing for myself sank in like warmth after a walk in the wind. Evan stepped toward the hall, toward the suitcase, and then stopped. "You bought tickets," he said, as if that proved something about me he did not want to see. "For the choir tonight and the train tomorrow," I said. "I am going." The words did not have flourishes. They did not need them. They were a door opening. Maya started to gather the bags again, then paused and looked at the children. "We will figure it out," she said, but her voice carried less polish now. The bright edge of assumption dulled. I went to the counter and slipped the gingerbread into a tin lined with parchment, pressed the lid until it snapped. I wrote their names on a small piece of tape and set it on top. Not a punishment, not a reward. A thing I had made that they could take with them. I turned to Ellie and tied her scarf more snugly under her chin, the wool brushing my knuckles. "You can call me from the airport," I said, "or from Florida. We will pick a day next week for skating. We will plan together." The last two words felt new in my mouth. Together did not mean that I vanished so they could move more easily. Together meant we looked at a calendar and asked what each person needed. Evan's eyes dropped to the spare key on the hook by the door, the one he and Maya expected to use whenever they needed something from my place, the one I had quietly kept, because it made sense for emergencies. I lifted it off the hook, slipped it into a small envelope, and sealed it with my thumb. I handed the envelope to Evan. "Keep it," I said. "If there is an emergency, you can call me first." His fingers closed around it like he did not know its weight until it sat in his palm. He tucked it into his coat with more care than I expected. "You're punishing us," he said, but he did not sound sure. "No," I said. "I am choosing my day. You will choose yours." He looked away toward the children, toward Maya, toward the stairs that led nowhere for him in my building. The silence opened, and I left it open. I did not rush to fill it with jokes or excuses. I let it work the way a tide works under a sheet of ice. In that quiet, my heart slowed to a pace I recognized as my own. I moved to the shelf and took down the snow globe. Its base was dark wood, a little scuffed at one corner. Inside, a small house sat under a tiny spruce, its windows painted with a yellow wash that made it look inhabited even when the globe sat still. I shook it once lightly and watched the flakes rise and tumble and drift down again. As I set it back, I said to the room as much as to Evan, "I am not a line item. I am not a safety net. I am your sister." The last word carried a weight I had not allowed it to hold because I had learned to wear it as a uniform. Sister had meant reliable and available, meant default. Now it meant blood and history and limits that protected those things. Maya cleared her throat. She looked at me with something almost like recognition. "Do you have a number for a sitter?" she asked. The question was not kind or unkind, it was practical. I did not. Families hire help by planning ahead, not by showing up at a door with bags and a checklist. "Try the church board," I said. "Even on a holiday someone might post." Or call Dave and Lila, I added, naming their neighbors who had teenagers often eager for extra cash. I gave possibilities not because I owed them, but because being firm did not require being cruel. Evan took a breath that lifted his shoulders and let it out slowly. He closed the planner. The sound was soft, a skin meeting itself, no snap. He rubbed his forehead, left a faint smear where his glove had brushed snow. I thought you liked spending time with them, he said, as if that settled it. I do, I said. I like it more when I can choose the time. He glanced at Sam and Ellie, and this time his gaze lingered on them, not as checkboxes, but as small people who needed more than logistics. Love is not a lesson I could teach him in the threshold of my apartment, but I could make him face the shape of it. Love included me. I walked to the fridge and took the small paper with my New Year goals and held it between two fingers. The red magnet clicked on the metal and held the page up where anyone could see it. Join a choir, visit the coast, take a class just for fun. I did not say anything about it, no speeches. I just let the words sit there the way the planner had sat on my table, except this time the plans were mine, drawn by a hand that had finally decided to write on its own paper. Ellie tugged at my sleeve and whispered if we could still watch the Snowman movie next week. I crouched to meet her eyes. Yes, I said. We will decide on a day together. We will make cocoa and wear our warm socks. She nodded, satisfied by a promise that held a date to be chosen later, not forced now. Sam asked if he could take 2 cookies. I told him to take 3. Maya wrapped her scarf again. The air near the door felt colder than the kitchen. I felt the boundary like a line of temperature, clear but not hard. Evan lifted the planner and slid it into his bag. His voice when it came was quieter. We have to leave, he said. It was a statement, not a command. He looked at me for a long second that felt like a bridge being tested. We will talk when we get back. I nodded. Call when you land, I said. I will be at the choir. He hesitated and then nodded back. The children stamped into their boots. Maya lifted the tin of cookies. Evan opened the door. Cold poured in bright and clean. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry from the machines downstairs. They stepped out and I followed them to the threshold, one hand on the doorframe, feeling the worn paint under my thumb. I wished them a safe flight. Then I did something I had rarely done. I let the door close first. Not on them, not as a slam, just as a gentle finish to a scene that had run far past its time. The latch clicked, not loud but certain. I stood a moment breathing the warm air of my home, the candle still burning softly, the snow globe at rest, the planner gone from my table. I looked at the clock. There were hours before the choir, enough time to shower, to choose a dress, to pack a scarf that matched my coat. Enough time to read a little, to hum the alto line I loved, to taste a cookie while it was still crisp at the edges. I felt my day settle around me like a shawl that finally fit. I did not feel cruel. I did not feel triumphant. I felt accurate, as if I had finally named the shape of something I had carried for years. I moved through the small rituals that made a house into a life, and nothing in the room argued back. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, my plans, humble and exact, held. Evan lingered by the door longer than I expected, his breath clouding in the cold air that slipped in from the hallway. He shifted the envelope with the spare key between his hands, as though its small weight unsettled him more than the heavy luggage at his feet. For the first time, his planner was not open, not dictating. It rested inside his bag, zipped away. He looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty cutting across his certainty. I didn't think you'd ever draw the line, he said. The words carried both disbelief and something like respect. I held his gaze and kept my voice low. Maybe I should have drawn it sooner. His face changed in a way I couldn't measure, part anger, part confusion, part recognition. Maya pressed her lips together, smoothing the children's coats, her silence a shield she no longer seemed eager to hold up. I bent down to Sam and Ellie, both bundled tight, their eyes searching mine for reassurance. We'll plan a day next week, I said. Not because your dad wrote it down, but because I want it. Do you understand? Sam nodded slowly. Ellie clutched the cookie tin and whispered that she liked skating best. I smiled and touched her mittened hand. Then skating it is. Evan cleared his throat as if to reclaim the authority he felt slipping. I reached for the snow globe from the shelf and placed it gently in his hand. The glass was cool, the little painted house inside waiting under its tree. "Shake it," I said quietly. He looked at me confused, then turned it upside down. The flakes scattered, swirling in a storm before settling again, slow and sure. "It takes time," I added, "but everything finds its place." He stared at the globe longer than I thought he would, then handed it back. His fingers brushed mine in the exchange, not firm, not commanding, simply human. I set it down again and stepped back. The apartment felt smaller with all of them crowded inside, yet it also felt undeniably mine. Evan zipped his coat, straightened, and finally said, "We'll figure something out. No fight, no promise, just words that admitted a space he had never given before." When they stepped into the hallway, I followed only far enough to see them turn toward the stairwell. Their voices drifted up as boots clattered down the steps. I closed the door, gently leaning my forehead against the wood for a moment. Behind me, the candle flame flickered steady. For once, the quiet did not feel like surrender. It felt like a choice. The apartment felt strangely wide after the door clicked shut. I stood still, listening to the muffled sounds of their boots on the stairs fade into nothing. The planner was gone, the bags were gone, the voices that filled every corner without asking were gone. In the hush that followed, I noticed the rhythm of my own breathing, slower now, as if my body had waited years for this release. I walked back to the table where Evan had sat and saw the faint mark his chair had left on the floor. It would polish out, but for a moment I let it remain a reminder of where his certainty ended. The candle burned low wax, softening around the edges, pine filling the air with a scent both sharp and sweet. I sat in the chair he had vacated just to see what it felt like and realized how heavy he had made the space seem. Sitting there now with his absence, the chair felt like any other. I reached for the snow globe, stilling my hand on its wooden base before lifting it. Inside, the tiny flakes had settled again, coating the roof of the painted house. I tilted it once more, not to show him this time, but for myself. The swirl rose, spun, then fell. Watching it calmed me, reminded me that chaos always gives way to order if you let it. My eyes landed on the tin of cookies, one left behind on the counter beside the parchment scraps. I broke it in half and tasted the ginger, sharp at first, then warm. For years I had baked for them and forgotten to taste my own work. The sweetness filled my mouth like a secret I had finally uncovered. I stood and crossed to the fridge. The paper with my goals waited under the red cardinal magnet. The words looked steadier now, no longer fragile scribbles on a late night. Join a choir. Visit the coast. Take a class just for fun. I touched the paper with the tip of my finger, grounding myself in its promise. The apartment held its silence, not empty but full. The walls no longer echoed with demands. They breathed with me. I realized I had not lost family in that moment. I had regained myself. My brother could no longer write my days into his planner. My days belonged to me, and that truth settled deeper than any apology he might someday offer. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, I wrapped a scarf around my neck and stepped outside. The air bit at my cheeks, crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. Lights twinkled on porches, strings of color blinking against the snow, but I walked with a steady pace toward the church where the choir would gather. Inside, the vaulted ceiling held the hum of voices warming up. I found my seat in the middle row, the program folded neatly in my hands. When the first notes rose, layered and strong, I felt them move through me like something I had been waiting to receive. The harmonies filled the air, filling me too, not with obligation, but with belonging. For years, I had measured myself only by what I gave away. Now I was reminded that receiving was its own form of grace. Over the next days, I kept my promises to myself. I took slow walks through the snow, let the cold sting my lungs, and returned home to cups of cocoa that steamed in my hands. I called Sam, and Ellie told them about the choir, listened as they shared their favorite parts of the movie they had watched on the plane. I promised them skating not out of duty, but desire. The difference felt enormous. Healing did not arrive in a single wave. It crept in small ways, through laughter at a neighbor's greeting, through the weight of a good book in my lap, through the smell of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen when I baked again, this time for no one but myself. I realized that saying no had not broken my family. It had simply redrawn the shape of our connection, reminding me that love could exist alongside limits. A lesson surfaced slowly, like a melody remembered. Love is not measured by sacrifice alone. Boundaries do not erase care, they protect it. I thought of my brother holding the snow globe, unsure, unsettled, forced for the first time to notice the pause between my silence and his demand. Perhaps he would learn from it, perhaps not. Either way, the decision had already changed me. As the new year inched closer, I pinned a small calendar to the wall, not for anyone else's use but my own. Empty squares stretched ahead, waiting for me to choose. I smiled because for once they were mine to fill.